The future is in God's hands, and He wants us to live that life to the fullest. So, how many of you have made a plan to do something, but then it completely goes unplanned? You plan to join a certain team, but then you don't make it. You plan to hang out with someone, but then they randomly don't want to be friends anymore. Maybe you planned a vacation with your parents, but then it got canceled. Or maybe you planned something for 2020 and then there was a pandemic. I don't know about you, but there have been times that I made plans to do something, but then they completely ripped up from under me. Jesus' brother James talked about exactly this in James 4. He said that our life is a warm breath of air that is visible in the cold. Have you guys ever done that? Where it is so cold outside that you check to see if you can see your breath? You see it for a second, but then it just vanishes. This is what James says our life is like. This is to show us how fleeting our life really is. We make these plans to do something, but we don't really know what tomorrow will bring. We are making plans and believing that we have our whole life in our own hands. We make plans that we know what tomorrow is going to look like, what the next year is going to look like, and maybe even our entire lives. It is not a bad thing to make plans and think our life will look a certain way, but we are not giving any room for God to move in our lives. The tomorrow we plan for might not actually be the tomorrow we get. It might not be the tomorrow that God was calling us to. Maybe you had something you planned for 2020, but then everything went online, everything you planned went right out the window. It may not have been the year you planned, but it doesn't mean that we should just give up. Think about how God can use you in those moments. We need to focus on God as we plan and go about our lives. His plan can look different than what we may have planned for ourselves. James then goes on to tell us that tomorrow, the future is in God's hands, and He wants us to live that life to the fullest. James wants us to put our lives in God's hand and let our plans include where He wants us to go. God should shape the way we think and the way we live. Paul, who is someone who wrote most of the New Testament, did just this. Whatever he may have planned, he only did it if the Lord wills. Whatever he did, whoever he talked to, and that is exactly how we should live our lives. God should be directing what we do, where we go. God has put us on this earth not to just do things, but to live our purpose, His purpose. Which brings me to the bottom line for today. It's not my purpose, it's God's purpose. God wants us to shape our mindset, our attitude, and our words. God wants us to live a life that He is in the center of. It isn't wrong for us to plan what we're going to do, but the issue is that we put our lives in our own hands and live a life that is according to ourselves. In Romans 8:5, it says, "Those who live according to the flesh have their minds set on what the flesh desires, but those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires." When we live by what we want to do, we are setting our minds on fleshly desires. But if we were to focus on God and the way He calls us to live, our mind is set on the Spirit. James then goes on to say in James 4 that when we plan for tomorrow, we are being ignorant because we are putting our life in our own hands. If we spend our days actually focusing on God and ultimately wanting what He does, we will live according to Him and His purpose and do what is right. Like I said, we should have God at the center and be focused on what He has for our lives. The way we focus on God is by spending time in the Bible, praying, and being in community with others who have God in the center, like JHM. Then, when we plan for tomorrow, the next year, or the rest of our lives, God should be at the center of all of that planning. When we go about our day, we should be open for God to move in it. We should be ready to step out in faith and follow. This world is fleeting, and it is calling us towards a life that is uncertain, difficult, and dark. But God is constant. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. When we focus our life around Him, we can trust that He will never change. The life He is calling us to live is full of hope, joy, and peace. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us today. Make sure to click the link in the description to join us for virtual life groups at 7 p.m. for some fun games and some fun hangs. We can't wait to see you guys there. If you felt encouraged by this message, make sure that you like, subscribe, and even share it with someone you think who needs encouragement in this time. We'll see you guys next week.